This is Everyday Economics, a podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. To support podcasts such as this one, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We're recording this episode on January 9th, and joining me, as always, is my friend and economist, Dr. Orphe Divounguy. He's a PhD. Orphe, this is kind of a weird time to be buying a house. I mean, we're in January, right? In the first few weeks of January. I mean, this is sort of the lull before the storm. Dear friends of mine in the real estate industry say that, well, the business never really comes to a grinding halt. But between Christmas and the Super Bowl, for some reason, activity is typically a little bit lighter. We are now just, I guess, probably 4 weeks away from the Super Bowl. So 4 weeks away from the
That's an understatement. Summer, fall, very dead in the industry, right? Sales plummet usually, but also new listings, right? People don't list their homes during that time. And so, very seasonal.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was, where the markets are hot and where the markets are cold. Obviously, we've, anybody that's paid attention to the real estate business knows that parts of Florida that went absolutely crazy, the Southeast in general, has had, tremendous growth in the last, couple of years. Texas and parts of Texas have grown significantly. Arizona, Boise, Idaho. But you're thinking that perhaps the best deals for 2023 are not going to be in the Sun Belt. They're going to be in the Midwest.
Absolutely. Affordability, housing affordability is the biggest challenge in the housing market today. We are here in this period of, we saw the massive slowdown in 2022, ultimately because mortgage rates increased, more than doubled in a very short period of time. Places with really, really high home prices, places that saw rapid increases through the pandemic. You take that, you add the doubling of mortgage rates, and it's almost impossible for people in those markets to buy a home anymore. It's very difficult, very difficult. I shouldn't say impossible, but it's very difficult. And ultimately, an improvement in affordability, which, by the way, I'd like to say it's already underway. It's already going on. The improvement in affordability is going to thaw the housing market and revive those markets that are struggling. But places that are relatively more affordable are going to fare better in 23. They're going to recover much faster in terms of activity, in terms of sales. They're going to recover much faster because they're more affordable. And what are those places? Most of the Midwest, you got great cities, growing infrastructure in like the Columbus, Ohio, in the Grand Rapids, Michigan, in the Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You got these places that are relatively affordable for home buyers, but also for renters. Rent affordability is pretty good in those markets. And so you have those markets, they're going to do better. And this is unfortunate. I look at a place like Chicago. You and I both lived in Illinois. I lived in Illinois. You live in Illinois. And Chicago is one of those cities that could be prime for a Midwestern revival. And yet, unfortunately, I'm not sure it's going to happen in Chicago. And here's why. I think everybody, maybe our listeners, I'm not sure if they're familiar, but Illinois as a state has lost population for 9 consecutive years. And so could Illinois be in line for a turnaround when housing affordability is relatively better, where Chicago is a city that competes, or at least tries to compete with the major cities on the coast, third largest city in America
and around the world?
The biggest challenge for Chicago is governance, is itself. It's corruption. It's high property taxes. If you're a would-be landlord in Chicago, you're going to struggle because, property taxes are so high, man. Well, how much can you charge in rent? How do you cover your expenses? How do you generate cash flow? This is the problem. To give you an example, a typical home in Chicago is worth about $310,000. Do the math on that. A typical Chicagoan would have had to pay $7,000 in property taxes compared to $3,900 for the typical American. And so the gap is vast. Chicago with the second highest property taxes in the country, the gap is vast. Yeah, unfortunately, Illinois could still benefit from this Midwestern revival, I think, but without dealing with this property taxes that add to housing costs, I think it's going to be a problem.
Let me give you a real world scenario. So when my wife and I bought our house in 2004, we paid about $365,000 for it. And our property taxes were about $8,400, which was high. Now, 19 years later, my house is probably worth about $60,000 more than what I paid for it. In 19 years, my property taxes this year are pushing $13,000. We talk about like economic policy and as it pertains to the state and taxation. What they've done is they've effectively, state government in Illinois has put a cap over the potential value growth of my house because the taxes would shoot so high that from an affordability standpoint, people are going to look at it and go, well, there's a point of no return for the home buyer who's taking a specific amount of money to live on, to pay for the mortgage and to pay for the utilities and then to pay for the taxes on a monthly level. There's not an extra bag of money that the average buyer, the average homeowner has to just throw at taxation. And it's hurt. Elsewhere, you're saying that's not the case. So like around Columbus,
you have places that are growing in population and, so there's demand is there. People are going there because they're more affordable. I think a lot of people forget that the cost of home ownership, is, it's not just that sticker price, it's not also just the money that you put down as a down payment. It's also in mortgage interest, but also in state and local taxes, which of course include property taxes. And Chicago happens to be an outlier in the Midwest when it comes to that. Property taxes in Illinois on average are higher than in California, which is just crazy. California with house prices, home values are so much higher. I think that the state of Illinois, which could really benefit, especially the Chicago area, which really could benefit from a year like this, in 2023, could really see a revival because of its house prices being very low there. Unfortunately, homeowners there and potential home buyers face really high housing costs because of the state and local taxes, specifically property taxes. I think that's unfortunate.
I'd read this piece in The Street before we had this conversation. So there's a story at thestreet.com about some of the other cities around the Midwest that they're perhaps potentially poised to be growing. And one of them was in Wichita.
For sure.
Pushing the boundaries to the west of the Midwest. Omaha, Nebraska, which I would say is about as, that's the prototype, in my view, the prototypical kind of Midwestern city when I think about it, Wichita and Omaha. But it also gave a shout out to Milwaukee and greater Milwaukee as an area that could be poised for some growth. I have looked around in the Milwaukee area just out of curiosity in terms of home prices. Milwaukee it's teased to some degree. Milwaukeeans are teased and, that they're like Chicago's largest suburb. But Milwaukee's a fine place unto itself. From an affordability standpoint, it's pretty good.
That's right. I mean, I got a little beef with the cold weather over there, but Chicago and all that. But, I always lump Pennsylvania in there, but Pennsylvania is really the Northeast, right?
It is. Well, I mean, yeah. when you referenced Philly before, I think if people in Philadelphia are listening and you suggested that they were in the Midwest, they'd. I know my wife's a Philly girl. She'd have made a frowny face on that one. But even Pittsburghers, don't consider themselves as really being Midwesterners.
For sure. We have this area of the country right there in the middle that is set to, I think, benefit, where markets are going to be relatively healthier because they're more affordable. They're relatively more affordable. And so I think this is what's to come in 2023. And it's a great opportunity for places in that part of the country to kind of get their act together, figure out how to bring in people, right, instead of pushing people out.
I appreciate your thoughts. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other high-quality podcasts at americastalking.com.